Well, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
I'm
you
happy
bet.
to be here.
Me too. So let's begin our journey before we get into your work by a question I always ask up front, which is 5 years ago, this pandemic was doing so much to change the world. How did you get through it? And how has it changed the way that you approach life today?
2020 was a big year for me. I was during 2020 with my second child. I'm 55, so I was having him when I was 50 years old. And so I had a company that was busy having people cancel all of our engagements within, 4 weeks. We lost a huge amount of our business because, of course, we do a lot. At the time, we did a lot of face-to-face training and leadership development programs in addition to executive coaching. So we had people canceling within 4 weeks. We lost, most of the year's worth of all of those events. And I was in my first trimester and I was exhausted. So, how I got through it was one day at a time, picking my head up, doing what I could do. I spent the rest of the year getting most of that business back and converting everything to virtual. Um, and how does it impact what we do now? Well, we certainly do a lot more virtual business now. People are much more comfortable with this, media. So we do a lot of work virtually. But I think, how it changed me is that anytime you go through that, I think you realize what you're capable of and what you can get through and keep moving through. And um, I so value my team, and I realize that together we really can do it. We're a small and mighty team. We have 40 coaches, but there are like six of us who are running the day-to-day operations. And that took a huge amount of fortitude to deal with everybody's personal story during that time.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for me. It was a crazy, crazy year.
Yeah. Well, I always thought during that pandemic, so my son's 20, he'll be 21 here in a few days. But I remember hearing that if you played classical music or kids in utero heard voices that it would increase their intelligence, you know? And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
always
yeah.
thought that
Mozart, right? It's always
Yeah,
Mozart.
exactly, right. So I thought during COVID, with everybody being home and the increased amount of noise, it would increase their intellect. And maybe we could make a show, a TV show, and all of those kids would be the COVID kids, and they would come up with an antidote so the COVID strain would die.
That is such a great story. I think it was mostly Tiger King, though, or whatever that show
Right,
was.
I know. But if we could come up with this later on and say, all right, these are the COVID-19 kids and they're going to get rid of the viral strain, I think it would be good because all of those kids that were born during that time are at a very special place. I mean, right on that frontier of the new and old world, because a lot of the newer kids still think that pandemics are a part of their reality, whereas our generation, we never saw anything like that and we thought it was dystopian and weird, and we would never see it in our lifetime.
Only in movies.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Never in reality.
Yeah, I mean, so my kids are Gen Alpha, which means they have a language to themselves.
Yeah,
And the 5-year-old, of course, doesn't remember any of that
sure.
because he was a baby. But the 8-year-old, we tried to really keep it from him during that time. We are just like, oh, school's dirty. We're just not going to go back for a little bit. It was like a year where we spent like at the local airport watching the planes take, anything that we could do for a 3-year-old that was not out in the world. But I think he has a little bit more understanding of that. But there are a tremendous number of things that kids experience today that I never had to worry
Yeah,
about.
yeah. It's a whole different world. And I still will see pictures of things from 2019 and I'm like, that was it. And it's kind of like 9/11 too. Before 9/11 happened, there was a different level because I hear it like, I remember I used to be able to drive up in my 20s to airports 20 minutes before a flight,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
hop out
yeah.
of your car, run in, you're grabbing for your paper
Take
ticket.
your friends to the gate. Yeah.
That's it. And you just get on the flight and you're off. But all of these things inevitably change over time. But Let's get into exactly what you do for a living. And to do that, speaking of kids, kids are a truth serum. They pull it out of us. If I put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds at career day and one of the kids was like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" What's your answer?
It's good. I actually do that at my kids' school. So we make leaders better at their jobs. That's what I tell a 12-year-old.
So let me ask you this. What at 12, what did you want to be? What was your ultimate dream gig?
At 12, um, I was a bit of an outcast. I don't know. I don't think I had one destination. I remember I was so much of an outcast, I wasn't having a good time at school. And, middle school is just terrible for
Yeah,
everybody, right? Small.
yeah. You could skip it.
So my parents were considering putting me in private school, and I remember driving to that interview. And I think my dad was probably trying to prepare me for the interview. I never had to do anything like that. Um, and I remember he said, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, well, we were joking about like either president or a pedicurist. Right? Like I want to stay in the like it was all a joke,
Yeah,
at 12, like it
yeah.
wasn't I didn't have a, oh well, I'm a ballet dancer or I'm an engineer or like I didn't have that. And I think what I take from that story for myself, and I think the gift that my parents gave me is um the ability to experiment and to not be tied down to, I have to be X and all of my world is going to filter towards accomplishing that thing. And that I got to go and explore the world and do a bunch of things and have a bunch of different careers and, a bunch of different interests. I've never done one thing at a time. I've always had, that hobby and that job or those two jobs, right? And that it's always been a matter of exploring what's out there in the world. And I think that served me really well. So I'm glad that I don't know. I guess I'm glad I can't answer that question with a like I always wanted to be X.
So let's needle into how this did happen, how you are helping leaders. What were the foundational elements? Are you originally from New Jersey?
I did grow up in New Jersey, but I've lived across the country and back.
Okay. So what were the foundational seeds that were planted into you that eventually led to you finding this career path and finding your place in the professional world?
Yeah. I've always just been really interested in who we are as human beings and how we think. My degree in college is in cognitive science. At the time, no one knew what the heck that was. There were like
Yeah.
5 schools that offered it.
Yeah.
Um, but that's an interdisciplinary study of the mind. So it's everything from philosophy to computers and linguistics and psychology. And just that was my dream major, because you get to study everything about who we are and how we work. So I think that was probably the foundation, but that's carried through everything that I've done. I mean, I've been a professional actor, and that's like studying people from the inside and getting to explore different cultures and different times and who we are as human beings when we're in the 1400s and the 1800s and the 2200s, right? All across time. And then as I started to like think, well, what do I want to do professionally, right? um, I I got into business by taking over the operations of an event management company. This was a little bit after 9/11 in New York, and this guy had promised himself, he's like, I'm going to move to Hawaii by the time I'm 50, so I got to get rid of my company. And I was the person that he handed it to. And so I ran operations and stepped into what turned out to be a failing company. And I had to tell the guy, like, it isn't solvent.
Yeah.
What you've handed me is not solvent. So
Yeah.
that wasn't the great end of the story. But in taking over that, I realized that I really enjoyed the hands in many things that it takes to run successful large corporate events. So then I kind of went off on my own, and I had my own event management company, and I did, like leadership conferences for the Annenberg Foundation, like, bringing people together from around the world. That was very interesting. And then I found coaching. A friend of mine was getting into coaching, going to explore what this training program was. At the time, no one knew what that was, right? There was maybe a little life coaching, maybe a touch, but mostly people didn't use the word, know what it was, to your point of like, different planet
Yeah.
uh, in the past. And I went and I sat in on this coach training program. I think it had like 8 people in it. Now the coach training programs have like hundreds of people and they're
Yeah.
done virtually and they're in person and virtual, they're huge. This one had like 8 people in it. And I sat in on the conversation and I thought, I know that conversation. I've been having that conversation. Like all the books on my bookshelf are about this conversation, this exploring how we think, how we develop ourselves beyond who we are currently into something more. I've been having that conversation for years. And so I felt very at home. I signed up for the program, took the coach training program, and then I graduated and it was the recession.
Yeah.
And so I started Arden Coaching during the recession. Um, but I was kind of naive and in New York, and even though everything's collapsing around me and people are walking out of buildings with like cardboard boxes of their stuff, so everyone's businesses imploded. Um, I just kept going, and
Yeah.
so it was just me to start as a coach, and kind of survived that first couple of years. Brought a few more people on, and then a few more people on, and it's grown over time.
I was just thinking about leaders and going back to my childhood in the 80s. Like, I'm trying to remember what was the first image that I saw on TV or in a book or otherwise that was an example of leadership. And I think it might have been my dad he sold cars and he was really into Lee Iacocca. And he had his biographies around. And I didn't know anything about Lee, but he just looked like this officious kind of like just the guy that got things done. But then I think about Reagan and his speeches. No matter where you are politically as a kid,
Yep.
Reagan had this enormous amount of charm and charisma, and he could completely comfort you, which is void of what we live through today. We just don't have that level of leadership, I think, that is a calming voice. So in your life, early on, who was the first example of leadership that either subconsciously or consciously got stuck in your head?
It's such a great question. I don't have the Lee Iacocca image. I don't have that, like, I saw one person on TV. What came to mind when you said about in the 80s and seeing that on TV and that image was actually the what was it? It was a perfume commercial. I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never let you forget you're a man because I'm a woman. Do you remember that
Yeah,
commercial?
totally do.
It's
Yes.
terribly, maybe dating and maybe embarrassing to say that that's one of my core memories. But I think that I can do everything as a woman. Now, we can debate about what the message is in that commercial and whether
Sure.
that's really what that is. But what I took from that is that I can do any and everything. And I think at that time, that's actually kind of a radical message
Yeah.
because, I don't have images of women on TV who are leaders. I
Yeah.
don't have, stories about women leading companies who were my inspiration. I don't have any of that.
Yeah.
And so that installation of, and of course my parents were a huge part of that. I'm not saying it came from a commercial, but that seed of that's possible.
I think the first political individual that embodied that was Madeleine Albright, maybe. I'm trying to think in the political realm.
He was at that conference I just talked about.
Wow.
He was
Yeah.
the key speaker at that conference. The one that I remember was, I think I was in like ninth grade when Geraldine Ferraro
Yes.
was
Exactly.
that was the first woman that I saw. And it was radical, right? It was
Yeah.
like, what? There's a woman who's going
Yeah.
to do something political? What?
Yeah.
And so that was the first one in my recollection.
I'm listening to the biography on Bill Clinton, and he was talking about Hillary saying some things when he was getting ready to run for president and how she would get picked apart. Like at one point, she was tired and someone said something, and she said, "Yeah, I could be home having tea and cookies and whatever." And the media honed in on that. But her point is that I'm not. I was
Right.
I was Hillary Rodham before Bill came around, and I was a lawyer before. So there you go. I'm going to do this no matter what and no matter how. So I think she was really seminal in that development of kind of being a professional and also being a mother because Chelsea was their priority for both of them,
Yeah.
you
I mean,
know.
she's gotten torn apart at every
Yeah,
turn.
yeah, it's horrible. Absolutely horrible. So let me ask you this. In your life, who was the first, who was your hero, your inspiration, your leader you looked up to?
Uh, that'd be my dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, he died when I was 23. So I'm sure I have a somewhat idealized picture because I didn't know him really as an adult, me being an adult. Um, but he was brilliant and known around his, so he was a doctor, he's a psychiatrist. Maybe I get some of my interest in the brain there.
Yeah.
And he was known for being an incredible mentor. Uh, and that the doctors that he worked with and the residents he worked with all would stop and tell him how valuable he was to their careers. I actually was on vacation with my husband. This must have been 10 years ago. So decades after my father had passed away. And we were in Ithaca, New York at a bar and got talking to the couple next to us and discovered that that woman had been mentored by my dad.
Wow.
And she was breaking down in tears at the bar telling me about the value of what he had provided to her.
Wow.
And to me, first of all, very meaningful to have that story,
Sure.
decades later. But um, like, that's what I want to provide.
Yeah.
We are trying to coach and develop these leaders, yes, so that their companies can be successful. My secret Trojan horse mission, which it won't be much of a Trojan horse if I say it on your podcast, but is that, I want people to have the tools to enjoy their lives and to have joy and power and agency and satisfaction in their lives. The best way to do that is with the coaching tools that I know, and the way to impact the most people with that as possible is through where people work. We spend, 8 or sometimes way more hours a day, right? That's a third of your life at work. And if you're spending that much time at work, that's where we can make the biggest impact.
Yeah.
And so, if you told me that working on a soccer field somewhere would make the biggest impact, I would be there. But to me, these tools have the greatest impact if we can work with leaders because they have the greatest impact in the organization.
It's interesting coming from kind of a scientific way of looking at the brain. When you think about your legacy of your dad and all of the formative memories, it kind of brings in that nature nurture. And I'm sure with your kids, when you look at that, like how much of this has nothing to do with me, but how much of this has to do with me. And all of those things that just get imbued in our, whether it's DNA, whether it's, it's a mystery sometimes how those things can happen.
Yeah, I mean, I know that a lot of the research that's come out recently says that it's so much more programmed than we care to admit, right? Like
Right.
it's way more nature than nurture in a lot of ways. I, I have a hard time believing that because I see the impact of, the work that we can do with adults who have gone past all those stages, right? All the personality things that have developed, your 3-year-old one, your 8-year-old one, your 13-year-old one, right? All of those formative moments. Um, I don't think I could do this if I didn't think people could change.
Yeah.
I believe that we have agency to do that. Now, I also see that we all have a default. We all have a way that our car pulls. I know that mine is like not to be silent, for instance. If you push me, I don't get quiet and retreat. I am the fight, not the flight.
Yeah.
So, we all have like that natural instinct. And I think that way our car pulls, but do I believe that that has to dominate and always control? No, I believe that, our prefrontal cortex is hard at work and we can actually shift some of those things. It does take repetition and it takes work and it takes practice and all those things. But I don't think I could do this if I thought it's pre-programmed.
Yeah, right. I get it. So
Yeah.
let's say you had a dream tonight and you ran into that young version of you waffling between becoming the president or taking care and beautifying feet. And
Yeah.
right?
No.
And
Yeah.
and yeah, and you could give that young version of you a coffee table book and you hand it over and it's your life. And you look at that version and say, this is what happened. This is your
Mm.
life. Would that version of you believe it?
Oh, you're gonna make me cry. Um, Yeah, I think so. I think that the amount of exploration that I've gotten to do would fit with her and
Yeah.
she would resonate with that. I mean, there's some spoiler alerts in there that I she'd be pretty upset about. But yeah.
But would you give her advice at that point, or would you just let it happen?
Mm. That's like a philosophical question. Do you go back and mess with the future
Right.
or um
Yeah. Not, and I don't necessarily, I'm not probing a tear in time, like
yeah,
Back
yeah,
to the Future kind of thing,
yeah,
but
yeah.
more of if you could just dispense a little wisdom.
Trust yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So
You
how
know,
do you,
a lot of us spend so much time doubting, you know, doubting what we want, doubting our instinct, doubting our capability. And it pretty much only gets in the way. I mean, not that we should all be like filled with ego and think we're the best and, have no second thoughts or doubts or reservations about something, but um, trust yourself.
but therapeutically speaking, we're our own worst enemies. We are the hardest on ourselves. If you ever want to get into a path of being a better leader, a better human, a better spouse, a better parent, it's all about putting yourself in check.
Yeah, it's that awareness, right? We
Yeah.
in coaching we often say like the dance floor and the balcony, like you're on the dance floor living your life, but there's a part of you who can get some perspective if you go up on the balcony and look down and see the context because you're not alone. There are other people down there, and how do you interact with them? And I think learning to have that, director's cut that you take with you,
Yeah.
I think is the first thing that we work with all leaders on, right? You have to have that level of self-awareness or you can't have the next conversation. We can't talk to you about how to better communicate with your team if you don't have that, balcony view. So I think the earliest you can develop that, the better.
When you look at your career timeline, there's all these moments, these magnanimous moments. It can be failure, it can be success. But on the success side, what is one of the seminal client moments that you've had that has helped you be anchored in the dark times?
Hmm. Be anchored in the dark times. I go back and I read testimonials. Um, because I think being in touch with that impact on a person to person basis and what people say the results have been from the work that they have done, that's the part that helps me remember the value of what we do. And so that even when it is challenging, that I know that it's important. And back to COVID, right? We can do it. We made it. We made it through that time. Plenty of other companies folded, plenty of other people, got laid off. Like I didn't do any of that and we made it.
Yeah.
And so uh yeah, I think remembering the value of the work and the impact that it has. And I have to go back and read what people said about it because to your point, like we're our worst enemy, right? It's not pre-programmed in there. I have to go and say like, oh right,
Yeah.
that guy. I remember that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. So is the face behind the business and family life and everything that you do, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What is your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Um, I heard a question the other day of, how do you describe yourself if you don't use your profession, your age, your family, or right? Like don't use any kind of qualifiers. So
Uh-huh.
that's what's running through my head right now is
Yeah,
how do
yeah,
I
yeah.
describe myself without saying, first I'm a mom, second I'm a business
Totally.
owner, right?
Uh-huh.
So I think I am uh, brilliant, strategic, kind, dynamic, creative, curious, and fun.
If you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one relative in your lineage that you never met or never really got to know, who would you go meet? Who would you talk to?
Hmm. My ancestors founded a now historic resort up in New York, and I think I would go back and meet him
That'd be cool.
because it's such a legacy through our entire
Yeah.
family
Yeah.
that I would go back and meet the person who started it.
That's cool. Um, yeah, my dad was actually from that. He was born in Brooklyn and raised on Long Island, and he actually left his life story behind. And he talked about his story of his grandmother making him a yam. They were really poor, and he talked about how magnanimous that would be, and that would be a fun moment to just to be there to watch that yam come out all warm out of the oven to see
Yeah.
how it all turned
The
out.
other story that came to mind for me, I don't know the names, which is why I didn't say it, but there's my grandmother who died at 105 and a half.
Wow, that's
Uh,
crazy.
I think you get to count half years when you get
Oh,
over
of course
100.
you do. That it's
Like up
like
to
being a
five and
baby.
over 100,
Yeah, 18 months, that thing.
months. Yeah, you get to do months. Um, uh, she told a story, and it's hazy for me, so I don't remember the details. But she told a story about, I think it might have been her grandparents, so way back, of two people who were, it was scandalous, right? They weren't supposed to be together, and like the guy went off to the barn of the farm near where she was so that they could meet, and like that was the first story that came to mind for me, but I don't know it well enough to identify who those people are. But that kind of um, that humanity back so many generations previous, um, to understand who those people were and see if there's any like inkling of that
Yeah.
gets passed down.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. So if anyone has questions, they want to hire you, they want to reach out, any of the good business, where do they go?
ardencoaching.com. So ARDEN coaching.com. There's a contact form there if they want to mention famous interviews. We have a free assessment we can give them.
Okay.
Happy to do that for your listeners.
I love it. I will put links in the show notes. This has been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for your story. Continued success. Have a great holiday season.
Thank you, Joe. What a pleasure. Such
Yes.
fun questions.
Good times. Absolutely.